All right. So today we're going to be talking about the truth about processed foods and addiction to them, what it actually means to be addicted to something, and what it actually means for something to be a processed food, because that term is thrown around. All good. Um, so first, before we dive in, I want to tell you about a free challenge that I'm having, and this will be useful for anyone. So I would totally love to have you. I'm going to put the link in the challenge. Link in the chat for the challenge. It's a 5-day mindful eating challenge. So I just announced this. It's going to be super fun. It's going from September, Monday the 30th to October 4th, the Friday. So 5 days long. It's going to be taking place within our free private Facebook community, and there's going to be daily lessons. So every day at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, I'm going to be going on Zoom for about 15 to 30 minutes to give a lesson on mindful eating of the day. There's going to be actionable steps that you're going to take, community interaction within the Facebook group. There's going to be prizes and chances to win free coaching with me. So it's going to be a super awesome challenge. And I know as we are all starting to enter the fall season, we're slowing down a little bit from the chaos in the summer. So I think it is just the perfect time to focus on our eating habits and start to learn to be more mindful. I'm gonna let in Lily. Hello. I just put in the chat, I'll put in one more time. There is a link. I'm doing a mindful eating challenge coming up in about 2 weeks, and I would love to have you. So you can find the details there. All right, so processed foods. You might believe right now that processed foods are bad, that we shouldn't be eating them, that they're not serving us or healthy in any way. But we first want to define, what does it even mean for a food to be processed? So according to Google, in the definition of a processed food, it's any food that is modified from its original state. So if you pull a carrot out of the ground, and you start to change that carrot in any way, it becomes processed. So what that means is, if you take a carrot out of the ground and you roast it, it is now a processed carrot. If you take that carrot and you shred it up, it is now a processed carrot. So we usually think of processed foods of things like Doritos, ice cream, candy. But what if you were to take a potato and slice it really thin, bake them with lots of chemicals such as oil, salt, and 10 different spices? Then does that make it processed? Does that make it bad for us? Does that make it something we don't want to eat? What if you mix honey and cream to make ice cream? Is that still processed? Because honey isn't really processed. You can get raw honey. Cream is debatable. Is that processed or not? If you just get cream from a cow, and I don't even know how they make cream, if they just separate out the fat milk from the cow's milk and you make ice cream out of that. Is that processed ice cream, or is that not processed ice cream? Honey, right? Whole food, and it's not really processed at all, or processed a little bit. And then we can think about something like date syrup or agave is processed, but we consider that a healthy sweetener. Dried fruit is processed. Refried beans are processed. Olive oil is processed. Protein bars, protein powders are processed. Any powder for that matter. So if you take any sort of supplement powder, if you take a greens powder or a vitamin powder or any vitamins at all vitamins are processed. They had to process something to give you that vitamin. If you take a piece of chicken and you start to put seasonings and marinate on that chicken and then you cook it, it is now a processed food because you have now processed it and added all these things to it. And you might be thinking, well, maybe it's what a processed food is if it has these extra sugars and fats added to it. Well, what if we make a smoothie and we add extra fruit to it, or we add extra honey to it? What if we add extra fat to it? Now it's all of a sudden, does that make it a processed food? It's getting broken down, mixed together. Or we have a fruit and nut granola bar that has been processed. Does that make it something that we don't want to eat? So I could go on, but you can see that the point is, something being processed isn't necessarily a bad thing. And the large majority of our food is considered processed. Like, not many of us are just eating raw carrots from the grounds or biting into a whole tomato that we get from our garden. It's usually processed in some way, shape, or form. So this isn't a bad thing, and this idea that foods are addictive, that processed foods are addictive, can't really be defined, because what would be a processed food and what wouldn't be? What would be addictive and what isn't? With a drug, such as cocaine, we can clearly say This is the drug. This is the one thing that's addictive about it, but that's not, we can't say the same thing with food. We've actually been processing food for thousands of years. This is not something that is new, that we've started packaging food and cutting up food and baking it and canning food. Like, think about, people canned food to preserve it for, we still do this, but this is their main way of preservation, is they can food. That is processing your food in a certain way to make sure it lasts. And I actually Googled how long have been people consuming sugar from sugarcane, and it's been for over 10,000 years. Sugarcane has been around and humans have been eating it. So clearly, it is not just sugar itself that is the problem. It is the way that we are going about consuming that sugar or fat or whatever the things are. So when we are struggling with binge eating, what it tends to look like is we're trying to be good all week. We're trying to cut it out. We're trying to be super healthy, good. And then we just say, screw it. And we end up binge eating 10 times the amount of sugar than we would if we just enjoyed some throughout the day. When I was researching this, they were saying that people would have sugar cane and they would just be munching on it in the field while they were working. So they would just literally be eating pure sugar throughout the day, munching on it in the field. Now, yes, cane is technically less processed. But even processed sugar, you take the sugar cane and you evaporate the water from it. That's how we get the sugar granules. That's been around for quite a while as well. So the problem that we want to look at first is how we show up when we believe we're addicted. If we tell ourselves we're addicted to sugar, we're addicted to food, how are we going to show up? And I want you to start as a little thought experiment. Let's think, if we were to tell ourselves in this moment, like, just play around with this. I want you to tell yourself you're addicted to water, that you can never get enough of it. No matter how much water you drink, you always need more. And once you have that first sip of water, there's no use for you. You're flooded with desire for more. You just have to have more water. It's never enough. You can't start once you stop. You have no control over drinking water, and you just always want more of it, right? How much do you want water right now? Like, I'm really thirsty now that I've been saying that. I'm like, oh my gosh, look, I have my water and have a little sip of it. But this is the power of our thoughts in the story we tell ourselves. If we're telling ourselves all those thoughts I just mentioned around food, which I notice a lot of people often are, we're going to act and show up and feel as if we are addicted to something. So it's really important to be aware of that. And knowing the research around food is not going to necessarily make you stop binge eating, right? People, like, I feel like people, my clients, the people who are in my world, you guys know so much about nutrition. You know what foods are nutritious and what foods aren't. No one needs me to really tell them that. And going on a deep dive rabbit hole on how bad processed foods are for you and how sugar is killing you and how you need to eliminate it is not going to be the thing that makes you stop binge eating. If everyone just needed more information on what was in our food and why it's not good for us, then no one would be overeating right now. Most people have that information available to us and they know that. So in fact, going down this deep dive and obsessing over this information around nutrition, it usually just makes you more obsessed around food. It usually makes you more anxious, more guilty, have more shame around your eating, and that oftentimes leads to more binge eating. So we actually end up creating worse eating habits. Now you might say, but what about the science? I've seen so much science that, like, all these foods are bad for us. So there's this one study that a lot of people will quote, and this study is where they did an experiment with rats, mice, whatever it was, and they found that sugar is more addictive than cocaine. And everyone says, yeah, if sugar's more addictive than cocaine, like, clearly I'm gonna be addicted. Now, what's really interesting is you have to go deeper with the studies. You can't just take nutrition knowledge and just assume everything's fact. We have to go behind the scenes a bit more. So the first thing that's really interesting about the study is the rats were in a starved state. They were not being fed adequately, so that way they would actually eat the sugar, right? They needed they needed the rats to be hungry, so they would go to the sugar water. So they were in the starved state. Now, if you are dieting and severely restricting your calories, you're going to feel addicted to sugar and carbs because this is a normal biological response. So when the rats were in this starved state, Of course, they are going to want the sugar water because they want to survive. That is their lower brain, their animal brain that is saying, we need to make sure we get calories in. We need to make sure we get as much sugar water in so we don't die from famine overnight. Same thing with our brain, that when we are not getting enough calories, our brain is going to get those sugary, carby food cravings because those are the foods that give us the biggest hit of energy. Fat and protein are harder for our body to digest. It takes more energy for them to digest. So it's a little bit harder to get those cravings versus something like carbs because that's that quick hit of energy that our body wants to survive. So you wouldn't say, "Man, I have this horrible addiction to water," if you hadn't had water all day. You'd be like, "Well, of course I want water, like, I need to drink and I've been thirsty, I haven't drinking anything." Yet we tell ourselves with food, "Man, why can't I just stick to this diet? Why am I having so many sugar cravings?" Well, it's because you're starving yourself. So of course you're going to feel a little addicted to food. That is normal. Your body is supposed to feel addicted to food when you need food. So that's really important to remember why we can't restrict when we're trying to change our eating habits, why it's so important to make sure we're well fed, we're well nourished. This doesn't mean that we can never feel an ounce of hunger, but it does mean that you can't be dieting. It does mean that you can't be skipping meals all day until the end of the day. It doesn't mean you can be trying to get by with just little bites of salad. You need to be fueling yourself. There was another study that showed that women they did, a study with, like they took away chocolate for a week, and then they just had, their control group, and the women who were deprived of chocolate for a week, they told them, "No chocolate, you're not allowed to have it." They had more cravings for chocolate, and they ate more chocolatey foods when the study ended than those who just went about their life and weren't deprived. So, really the problem is our restriction mindset around these foods. It is our diet brain that is causing this. Now, back to the rat study. I think it's also important to notice that we're not rats. We are humans. So we have an extremely complicated brain with very intricate psychology that has exponentially more factors in deciding how to eat. We do not just make our food decision based off of survival. We make our food decisions based on hundreds of different factors because we have a complicated brain with complicated psychology. So we have this part of our brain called our prefrontal cortex that helps us plan, think ahead, and think about how do we want to feel? What are our health goals that rats do not have? Rats do not think about their health goals when they're deciding to have the sugar water or the cocaine. So sure, if we were to just follow this primal animalistic instinct to eat, we might go for the sugar, but luckily for us, we have this other part of our brain that exists and is available to us. And this part of our brain helps us make logical decisions that will feel good, and it can see the nuances of eating different foods. It has food preferences. It knows that, oh my gosh, I'm gonna feel. Remember that last time I ate a salad with chicken and rice and avocado, and I felt so energized and I just felt really good and light throughout the afternoon? Our brain has the ability to remember that and say, "Maybe I'd like a salad this time too. I think that would be good." Animals don't learn in that same way. Um, I have a cat and she overeats all the time if she has an automatic feeder, but the automatic feeder broke recently, and so we've been having to feed them. And she doesn't remember that, "Hey, yesterday when I overate and I threw up because I ate too much, I should probably slow down today and check in with my body and make sure I'm listening to my fullness signal." She doesn't know that, right? Because she doesn't have her prefrontal cortex, but we do. We can make those decisions. Now, if all processed foods were truly addictive, no one would be able to eat them in amounts that feel good. But that's just not true. I see plenty of people every single day have a bag of chips with lunch and move on. They just stop eating them. They don't get a second bag of chips and a third bag of chips or obsess over them. They just eat them and move on. So if chips themselves, if Doritos were truly addictive, no one would be able to eat them in that one amount. They'd always have to finish the bag. My brothers are natural eaters, and I have frequently seen them leave like 3 chips in the bag. If you have kids or you have a friend like this, I just remember my mom always getting so mad when there was like a fourth of a cup of cereal left in the cereal box, and it's like, "What are we gonna do with that?" But they had no problem leaving that, but if cereal was truly addictive, they would finish the whole box. They would not stop with that last few bites, but they did. I will have just square or 2 of chocolate and leave the rest behind, showing that chocolate itself is not addictive. I will have 1 scoop of ice cream and move on. You will see kids forgetting about the candy bag that they were having to go play with their toys. So also, if the food hold on, sorry, my notes are all messed up here. Okay, I already said that point. So basically, yes, if the food itself were addictive, everyone who ate them would be addicted to them, but that's not true. Now, additionally, if all the processed foods, so if we could say, okay, if any food that has extra sugar in it, as in the granular sugar added to it, or these fats that aren't healthy to us, if they have those in those, they must be addicted. Then we would be addicted and obsessed to every single processed food that has those in that. And that's just not true. Some people might feel a little obsessed with ice cream. I personally don't like ice cream that much. Wasn't always that way, but I just could take it or leave it. Gummy bears with pure processed sugar, right? Those are so processed. It's just distilled sugar into its tiniest form. I think gummy bears are disgusting. I hate gummy bears. They make my stomach hurt and they make me want to like throw up because I hate them so much. Now cookies and brownies. I love cookies and brownies, but some people would prefer the ice cream instead. But if all foods were addictive, if the cookies, brownies, and everything were addictive, then everyone would love all those foods all the time. Chips for me, I could really take or leave chips. Sometimes I like them, sometimes I don't. There was a book, I haven't read it, but maybe if you've heard it before. It's basically about how they're engineering foods to make them more addictive. I think it's called like the Dorito effect or something, and they talk about how Doritos, they have like all these powders and substances added to them to make them the most optimally delicious things that we want to eat. I think Doritos are disgusting. I think they are really like, I don't like the taste of them. I think they taste chemically. I think they taste, the oil in them tastes really fake to me. Like I would be okay never eating a Dorito for the rest of my life, but that goes against the science. According to the science, I should be addicted to them. But we need to look at our actual experiences of what's true. And maybe this is true for you too. Maybe there's a brand of crackers or chips or something that you just like could take or leave, and it's not really that good to you. And it wasn't always this way for me. So when I was stuck in this dieter's brain and when I was binge eating and I looked at foods as good and bad, I would eat any ice cream. I didn't care if I liked it or not because it was off limits and I wanted it. So be careful and be aware if you know that your brain it goes into the good and bad food labels and we're either being on track or off track, we're either doing good or we're doing bad. If you have those labels right now, you're going to feel more addictive than you were if you were to get rid of those labels. So there's 3 factors that might make processed foods feel more addictive than they actually are. And notice how I said feel, not become. It's a feeling that we have. We feel addicted. We are not actually addicted. So the first factor is how you eat these foods. If you are super freaking hungry and you start eating ice cream, you're probably going to want a lot of ice cream, right? Going back to my first point on if you are in like this starved state, that is not something that's wrong with you. That's not the food's fault that you're wanting it. It's your biological response to hunger. Now, second, if you eat with the purpose of numbing out how you're feeling or escaping an emotion, you're going to feel more addicted to foods if you're trying to use them for their not primary purpose, which is to fill our hunger. So if you're eating ice cream because you were sad and you were trying to feel better, well, the truth is ice cream is never going to make you feel better because all it can solve is hunger, or I mean, ice cream's really a pleasure food, but it's not going to give you any more joy if you're binging on it. So you're never going to get to the point where you feel satisfied with it because you're looking for something that doesn't exist in ice cream. Like true joy and happiness comes from our thoughts, not from ice cream. I'm not saying that sometimes ice cream isn't delicious and we can enjoy a scoop of it, but we're looking for the wrong thing in the wrong place. Also, if you're eating these foods in an urge frenzy, so if you have a habit, let's say, every day after lunch, you have something sweet, but you binge on something sweet, because there's nothing wrong with having something sweet after lunch. But let's say every day after lunch, you binge, you raid your cabinets, you have 10 cookies, you have a whole bunch of everything inside. Okay, if you are getting an urge in that moment and you try to sit down and eat these foods and say, well, I'm not addicted, because you're having a strong urge in that moment, your higher brain is starting to shut down a bit. It's still there. It never goes away. We can't just get rid of it. But that's the time that we want to make sure we're using our tools around our urges. So if you don't have my urge audio yet, you can go to the website of theconfidenteater.org, and there's a little corner button for my urge audio that you can download and get to help get you through an urge. In my Confident Eater program, I teach you a ton of tools around urges, and we want to be using those tools to stop our urge frenzy before we eat something. Otherwise, we're probably going to feel out of control around it. Now, the second factor that might make these processed foods feel more addictive is our thoughts during eating them. So this goes back to the beginning when I was talking about, if you're telling yourself the whole time, I'm addicted to this, I can't stop, I can't just have one, it's not possible for me, I'm obsessed with this food, guess what? You're going to act that way and you're going to want to keep eating. So instead, we want to change our thoughts to things like, I'm in charge. I can stop whenever I want. This food is not the boss of me. I'm the boss of me. I get to decide how much I want and what feels good. I'm not addicted. I am a really smart human being. Obviously, the food does not control me. I get to make my decision. So all of those thoughts will help us eat them more in control. Now, my final point is how often we eat these processed foods. Again, processed. Most of our foods are processed, but these like very, you know what I'm talking about, the highly manufactured, a whole bunch of added stuff to them, all of those. So I'm not talking about if you just have a cookie every day or some chocolate every day, like totally good, like have that, enjoy it. But what I'm talking about is if someone's diet is 90% or 100% highly manufactured, then this is where we're going to start to see more of those negative effects that science shows. So if someone is waking up and eating frozen waffles from the box with syrups at breakfast, and then they're eating white bread with sandwich meat and Kraft cheese and chips for lunch, and then they're having a candy bar as a snack, and then they're stopping at McDonald's on the way home, and then they're having a box of mac and cheese as a late night snack with hot Cheetos. Like, yes, we might start running into some issues because that is when the body starts to get a little more overwhelmed with all of those things, and it starts to get used to and expect that type of food. So that's where when people are saying, well, their body has just started to adjust to it, and like their body like actually feels like addicted to it. That can happen. I am not saying that never happens and that food addiction is never a real thing, but it is a very, very, very small percentage of the population that is actually dealing with this sort of food addiction where they're going to get like big withdrawals because of how processed they are, because they're having extreme amounts of sodium and sugar, like way higher than most people. Then yes, that's a whole different conversation that we would work on of how do we change that instead. But for the majority of us, if we're eating whole foods, again, these words are so nuanced, but whole foods meaning, you're eating your fruits and vegetables, you're getting in some whole grains, some protein, some healthy fats such as avocados and olive oils and all these other things, nuts. If you're eating like that most of the time, your body's going to learn to expect that type of food and genuinely crave it. The reason I don't like gummy bears and Doritos is because I genuinely love eating healthy because it feels really good to me and it tastes really good to me. So know that the more you eat these nutritious foods, the more your body will adjust to them and the more it actually craves them. But only if we get rid of our diet brain. If you're still operating with a diet brain, you're probably not going to crave these healthier foods because you're operating from the scarcity mindset where your brain still thinks food is disappearing from the face of the planet Earth and you better eat it all right now, even if that's not really true. So you might surprise yourself with how little you actually want these other foods when you become this natural confident eater. The more you start to become this intuitive eater, the easier gets. And that doesn't mean sometimes you're not going to eat some chocolate and the urge for more will come up and your brain will like, I want more, but that doesn't have to be a bad thing. That could just be, okay, no worries. Like I'll get more in a little bit. Just like if you're going on a hike and you're really thirsty and you're like, oh, I just want to drink all my water right now. But you decide, you know what? I'm going to wait to drink my water for another 15 minutes because I have a long freaking hike ahead of me and I want to preserve my water. I don't want it to all run out. So we can do the same thing with food too. We have that self-control. We have the power. Okay, so that is all for today. I would love to know if any, I know you're at work, Mary. So if either of you have any questions or any takeaways, feel free to put them in the chat or questions. Talking about all the thirstiness, and I'm gonna be so thirsty after this. See, your thoughts matter, they're important. So while you're putting those in, I'm gonna again put in the link one more time just for our mindful eating challenge. If you're watching this back on replay, you can go to my website, theconfidenteater.org, for the up-to-date challenges, trainings. We have coffee chats every week, but it's just theconfidenteater.org/mindful/eating sorry, dash eating dash challenge, and I'll put it in the description as well. All right, so I'll wrap us up. So we will have coffee chats next week, but the following week, October 1st, we're not going to have coffee chats because that's going to be when the mindful eating challenge is happening. So we are going to have so much fun, goodness with that I want you to participate in all those events. So I will see you guys next week. Have a good week.